I never imagined that the happiest day of my life would become the day my career exploded in front of 200 wedding guests. Looking back, there were signs. There are always signs. The problem is that when you're busy surviving, you don't realize you're collecting red flags until they're stacked so high they block the sunlight. My name is Emily Carter, and for 6 years I worked for Mercer Logistics. If you had asked me a month before my wedding what I thought about my job, I would have told you I was lucky. Not because the work was easy, not because the pay was amazing, and definitely not because management treated people well. I felt lucky because I had built something there. I started at Mercer when I was 24 years old, fresh out of college, carrying a student loan balance that looked more like a mortgage. I wasn't special. I didn't have connections. I wasn't related to anyone important. I was just a woman with a business degree, a second-hand laptop, and enough determination to work until my eyes hurt. The company hired me as a customer support coordinator. The job was simple in theory. Customers called, problems happened. I fixed them. At first I handled shipping delays, then inventory disputes, then warehouse coordination, then project management. Every time something broke, someone somehow ended up calling me. I became the person people relied on when everything else failed. At first I was proud of that. Then it became expected. You know how it goes. The more capable you are, the more people assume you'll always be capable. Eventually, your extra effort stops being impressive and starts being invisible. Still, I loved solving problems. I loved building systems. I loved helping teams function. And most importantly, I loved proving people wrong. Especially men who looked at me and assumed I was too young to understand operations. I learned quickly, worked harder than anyone around me, stayed later than everyone else. By year 3, I was basically doing the work of 2 departments. By year 4, I was training managers who earned more money than I did. By year 5, executives were quietly asking for my opinions before making major decisions. But despite all of that, my title barely changed. My salary moved slower than inflation, and promotions always seemed to go somewhere else, usually to someone louder, someone better connected, someone related to somebody. Which brings me to Ethan Mercer, the CEO's son. If you've ever worked in a family company, you already know exactly what kind of person he was. If you haven't, let me explain. Imagine someone who inherits authority before earning competence. Then give that person unlimited confidence. That's Ethan. When I first met him, he was 28. Expensive suits, perfect hair, luxury watch, permanent smirk. The kind of guy who said things like, "I'm a natural leader." People who are natural leaders never say they're natural leaders. Ethan said it constantly. He joined the company after spending 2 years bouncing between startups that mysteriously failed shortly after he arrived. Officially, he was there to learn the business. Unofficially, everyone knew he was being groomed to take over someday. The first time we worked together, he asked me to explain a supply chain report. I spent 30 minutes walking him through the numbers. At the end, he nodded confidently and said, "Exactly what I was thinking." It was not what he was thinking, because 5 minutes earlier he had asked me what inventory turnover meant. I remember driving home that night and telling my fiancé Daniel about it. Daniel laughed so hard he nearly spilled coffee all over our couch. "Let me guess," he said. "He'll be your boss within 2 years." I hated how accurate that prediction turned out to be, because Daniel was right. By year 6, Ethan became division director, over people with decades of experience, over managers who had built entire departments, over professionals who actually understood the business. The announcement email praised his visionary leadership. The office reaction was less enthusiastic. One warehouse manager literally walked into my office, sat down, and stared at the wall for 10 straight seconds before speaking. "Visionary?" he finally said. "I once watched him microwave aluminum foil." I laughed. Then I cried internally because he wasn't exaggerating. Ethan's leadership style was simple. take credit when things went well, assign blame when things went badly. He excelled at presentations. Unfortunately, presentations aren't the same thing as management. Under his leadership, turnover increased, projects slowed down, employee morale collapsed, yet somehow he always escaped accountability. Being the owner's son had advantages. Every problem became someone else's fault. Every success became his achievement, and every criticism became resistance to innovation. The worst part wasn't his incompetence. The worst part was his need to humiliate people, especially women who knew more than he did, especially women who weren't afraid to correct him, like me. The first major conflict happened 6 months before my wedding. We were in a strategy meeting, 12 people around the table, quarterly review, standard stuff. Ethan was presenting warehouse efficiency projections. Halfway through his presentation, I noticed a problem. A major problem. His forecast calculations were wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. The projected savings he was promising investors literally didn't exist. At first, I thought maybe I misunderstood, so I checked the spreadsheet again. Then again. Then again. Nope, still wrong. I raised my hand. Ethan? He looked annoyed immediately. Yes? I think the warehouse utilization formula is referencing outdated data. The room became quiet. He smiled. The fake smile. The dangerous smile. The numbers are correct. I turned my laptop toward him. No, they're not. Several managers leaned forward. One by one, they started checking their own copies. Then came the silence. The kind of silence that confirms you're right. Ethan's face reddened. He realized everyone could see the mistake. For a brief moment, I expected professionalism, maybe gratitude, maybe a simple correction. Instead, he laughed. Emily, sometimes understanding executive-level forecasting requires broader context. The room froze. Translation? You're too stupid to understand. I stared at him, then stared at the spreadsheet, then back at him. I built this model 3 years ago. More silence. One manager coughed to hide a laugh. Another looked at the ceiling. Ethan suddenly became very interested in changing slides. Meeting over. Issue avoided. At least publicly. Privately? That was different. 2 hours later, he appeared in my office, closed the door, sat down, and smiled. Never trust a smiling narcissist. You embarrassed me in there. I looked up from my computer. No. I corrected a mistake. His jaw tightened. You could have waited. The investors would have received incorrect projections. You made me look incompetent. That sentence stayed with me because it revealed everything. Not, the numbers were wrong. Not, thank you for catching that. Not, let's fix it. Just, you made me look incompetent. As though the real problem wasn't incompetence, the real problem was people noticing it. I realized then that Ethan didn't care about being right. He cared about appearing right. Huge difference. And dangerous. Because people who value appearances over reality eventually become threats to everyone around them, including themselves. That meeting changed everything. From that day forward, Ethan treated me differently. Emails became colder. Meetings became hostile. Projects I managed suddenly faced extra scrutiny. He wasn't stupid enough to openly retaliate, but he was petty enough to make my life difficult. The timing couldn't have been worse, because while work was getting harder, wedding planning was reaching peak insanity. If you've never planned a wedding, imagine organizing a military operation while everyone involved is emotional. That's wedding planning. Daniel and I had been together for 5 years. We met in a bookstore, the least romantic place possible. I was trying to reach a book on a high shelf. He offered to help, then accidentally dropped 3 books on his own head. True story. My first impression was, well, he's cute. My second impression was, he's definitely not coordinated. Fortunately, coordination wasn't a requirement. Kindness was. And Daniel had more kindness than anyone I'd ever met. When my father died unexpectedly 2 years into our relationship, Daniel became my anchor. When I doubted myself, he believed in me. When work overwhelmed me, he reminded me I wasn't my job. When Ethan started making life miserable, Daniel listened to every complaint without once telling me to calm down. Instead, he would say, "What happened today?" And then he'd let me talk. Sometimes that's the greatest gift someone can give you. Not advice, not solutions, just space. The wedding itself was supposed to be simple, elegant but affordable. Close friends, family, good food, good music, no drama. Which, in retrospect, feels almost adorable. Because life apparently heard that plan and decided to create the exact opposite. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received an email from Ethan. Subject line: mandatory attendance. Attached was a meeting invitation scheduled for the morning after my wedding. My honeymoon started that day. I stared at the email, then reread it, then called HR. Surely this is a mistake. The HR representative sounded uncomfortable. It came directly from Ethan. I'm on approved leave. I know. Then why am I invited? Long pause. You'll need to discuss that with him. Wonderful. I walked straight to Ethan's office, knocked once, entered. He barely looked up. What? I'm on vacation that week. He shrugged. The meeting is important. My honeymoon is important. Reschedule it. My honeymoon? The meeting. I stared at him. You scheduled it. He finally looked up and smiled. That smile again. The one that said he was enjoying this. We all make sacrifices for our careers. I left before saying something career-ending. The wedding was 21 days away, and somehow my boss's son was still finding ways to make it about himself. At the time, I thought that would be the worst thing he did. I was wrong. Very, very wrong. Because while I was finalizing seating charts and choosing music, Ethan was planning something that would turn my wedding reception into the most humiliating night of my professional life. And I wouldn't discover it until I was standing in a white dress, holding my husband's hand, believing the hardest part of the day was over. The morning of my wedding began at 5:12 a.m. Not because I wanted it to, because my brain refused to let me sleep. I opened my eyes, stared at the ceiling of my apartment, and immediately remembered. Today's the day. After 18 months of planning, budgeting, negotiating, compromising, organizing, and stress-eating enough chocolate to fund a small country, I was finally getting married. For a few seconds, I just lay there smiling. Then panic arrived. Not full panic, wedding panic. The special variety that convinces you the florist has disappeared, the caterer has forgotten your address, and someone has accidentally booked your reception hall for a monster truck rally. I grabbed my phone. No missed calls, no emergency emails, no disasters. Yet. Daniel was staying at a hotel with his groomsmen, following the ancient wedding tradition of pretending couples need to be separated before a ceremony. Personally, I thought the tradition was ridiculous. We already lived together. We shared a mortgage. We had seen each other with food poisoning. There were no mysteries left. Still, both our mothers loved the tradition, so we went along with it. I checked my messages. One unread text from Daniel. Good morning, future wife. Don't stress. Today is ours. I love you. Instantly, my shoulders relaxed. That was Daniel's superpower. Not grand gestures, not dramatic speeches, just an incredible ability to make everything feel manageable. I texted back. Good morning, future husband. Try not to drop anything on your head today. 3 dots appeared, then, no promises. I laughed, the first genuine laugh of the day. Outside my apartment window, the city was still waking up. Cars moved through quiet streets. The sky glowed with soft shades of pink and orange. Everything felt calm, peaceful, normal. If someone had told me that less than 12 hours later my employment status would become dinner table conversation for 200 wedding guests, I would have laughed in their face. Instead, I got dressed and started preparing for what I believed would be the happiest day of my life. Around 7 o'clock, my maid of honor arrived. My younger sister, Lily. Technically younger by 3 years, emotionally older by about 30. Lily possessed the unique ability to remain calm in situations that made other people lose their minds. Wedding emergency? Calm. Family argument? Calm. Natural disaster? Probably calm. She entered carrying coffee and breakfast sandwiches. How's the bride? Excited? Translation? Terrified. Good. I frowned. Good? Everyone should be a little terrified before making a lifelong commitment. She handed me coffee. You'd be more worried if you weren't worried. That somehow made sense. By 8:30, the apartment was full. Bridesmaids, hairstylists, makeup artists, family members, noise, chaos, laughter. The atmosphere felt electric. Every room buzzed with activity. At one point, my aunt started crying because she remembered teaching me how to ride a bicycle. 10 minutes later, she started crying again because someone complimented the flower arrangements. At weddings, people cry for reasons that would never hold up in court. While makeup artists worked their magic, I checked my phone one last time. Bad idea. 3 new work emails, all from Ethan. My stomach tightened immediately. Subject line 1, need status update. Subject line 2, follow-up. Subject line 3, urgent. I stared at the screen. Today, on my wedding day, he was emailing me. Again. Lily noticed my expression. What's wrong? I showed her the phone. She read the subject lines, then laughed. Not a happy laugh, a dangerous laugh. The kind people use right before committing felonies. Your boss's son is emailing you on your wedding day? Apparently. Have you responded? No. Good. She took my phone, turned it off, and placed it inside a drawer. There. What if it's important? She gave me a look. The building could literally be on fire and it would still be someone else's problem today. For once, I didn't argue. She was right. For 6 years, I had made work a priority. Today belonged to me. At least that's what I thought. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Perfect, actually. Not perfect because everything went according to plan. Nothing ever does. Perfect because the things that went wrong didn't matter. One groomsman forgot where he was supposed to stand. The microphone stopped working briefly. A flower girl became distracted by a butterfly and wandered away. Nobody cared, because Daniel was there, waiting at the end of the aisle. The moment I saw him, everything else disappeared. The guests, the decorations, the nerves, all of it faded. There was only him, his smile, his eyes, the expression on his face when he saw me. I had imagined that moment for months. Reality was better, much better. Daniel looked like someone who couldn't believe his luck, and honestly, I felt exactly the same. As I walked toward him, memories flashed through my mind. Our first date, our first apartment, late-night conversations, road trips, arguments, reconciliations, every small moment that had brought us here. By the time I reached the altar, I was already fighting tears. Daniel squeezed my hands. You look incredible. I laughed through watery eyes. You clean up pretty well yourself. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows, rings, promises, love. the things that truly matter. Then came the kiss, the applause, the announcement. For the first time in my life, I was officially married. Mrs. Emily Carter Williams. The name sounded strange, wonderful, terrifying, perfect. The next several hours moved quickly. Photographs, congratulations, family conversations, more photographs. Apparently, weddings are 70% photography and 30% everything else. By late afternoon, guests began arriving at the reception venue. The ballroom looked incredible. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White roses decorated every table. Soft music drifted through the room. Months of planning had transformed an empty space into something magical. For the first time all day, I relaxed. The hard part was over, or so I believed. Dinner started around 6. The atmosphere was warm and joyful. People laughed, danced, shared stories. My college friends embarrassed me with old memories. Daniel's cousins challenged each other to increasingly ridiculous dance competitions. Even my mother looked relaxed, which was rare enough to qualify as a historical event. As the evening continued, I found myself standing near the sweetheart table with Daniel, watching everyone, taking it all in. The room felt full of love, the kind of moment people remember forever. Then my phone buzzed. I frowned. The phone was supposed to be off. Lily had apparently returned it without telling me. A notification appeared. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something made me open it. The message was short. Hope you're enjoying the party. See you soon. E.M. My blood ran cold. E.M. Ethan Mercer. Daniel noticed immediately. What happened? I showed him the message. His expression darkened. Why is he texting you? I don't know. Did you invite him? No. Anyone from work? A few coworkers. But not him. Definitely not him. Daniel looked toward the ballroom entrance. A feeling of unease settled into my stomach. Not fear exactly, more like instinct. The sense that something was wrong, very wrong. For the next 20 minutes, I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he sent it accidentally. Maybe... The ballroom doors opened, and there he was, Ethan Mercer, standing in the entrance, wearing an expensive black suit, holding a champagne glass, smiling. My stomach dropped. He wasn't alone. 2 junior managers from the company stood behind him, people I barely knew. The conversation around the room began slowing. Guests noticed the newcomers, then noticed my reaction, then noticed Ethan walking directly toward me. Daniel stepped slightly closer, protective, alert. The smile on Ethan's face grew wider, and suddenly I understood something. He hadn't come to celebrate. He hadn't come to congratulate us. He hadn't come because he cared. He had come for a reason, a specific reason, and whatever that reason was, he was enjoying it far too much. Every instinct I possessed screamed the same warning. This man is here to cause trouble. I just didn't know how much trouble. Not yet. Because as Ethan crossed the ballroom floor toward us, carrying something tucked beneath his arm, I was still assuming there were limits to his behavior. I still believed there were lines he wouldn't cross. I still believed basic decency would stop him. I still believed nobody would be cruel enough to deliberately ruin someone's wedding reception. A few minutes later, I would learn exactly how wrong I was. And when I did, the entire room would fall silent. The moment Ethan stepped into the ballroom, the atmosphere changed. It's difficult to explain unless you've experienced it yourself. Most people carry energy into a room. Good energy, bad energy, nervous energy, excited energy. Ethan carried disruption. Conversation slowed as he moved between tables. Guests glanced toward him, then toward me. Even people who had never met him could sense something was wrong. Maybe it was the confidence. Maybe it was the smile. Maybe it was the fact that nobody crashes a wedding reception carrying a champagne glass and a smirk unless they're planning something. Daniel shifted beside me. You want me to ask him to leave? Part of me immediately said yes. Another part of me wanted to avoid a scene. It was my wedding. My family was here. My grandmother was here. I didn't want drama, especially not work drama. I'll handle it, I said quietly. Daniel didn't look convinced. Neither was I. Ethan continued approaching, slowly, deliberately, like someone making an entrance. The two junior managers following him looked uncomfortable. Good. At least someone did. When Ethan finally reached our table, he raised his glass. Congratulations. His tone sounded friendly. His eyes did not. I forced a polite smile. Thank you. I have to admit, he said, looking around the ballroom, you did a nice job. The comment felt strange, artificial, like an actor reading dialogue. Daniel extended a hand. Daniel. Ethan looked at the hand for a second before shaking it. Ethan Mercer. The handshake lasted less than a second. Neither man smiled. Not really. Then Ethan turned back toward me. I wasn't sure whether to come. Then why did you? I asked. A few nearby conversations had already stopped. People were listening. Ethan knew it, and he loved it. I felt it was important. Important? Very. Something tightened in my chest. Every instinct told me to end the conversation, to tell him to leave, to walk away. Instead, I stood there trying to remain polite, one of my biggest flaws. I've always believed people deserve chances. Sometimes they don't. Ethan reached inside his suit jacket. My stomach sank, because suddenly I remembered the email, the text message, the timing, the expression on his face. This wasn't a social visit. This was planned, every second of it. He pulled out a folded envelope, cream-colored, official-looking. My pulse quickened. What is that? I asked. His smile widened. A wedding gift. The room seemed quieter now, not completely silent, but close, enough that nearby guests could hear every word. Daniel's expression hardened. Then give it to her and leave. Ethan ignored him. His eyes never left mine. You've worked very hard for the company, Emily. A cold feeling spread through my body, not because of what he said, because of how he said it. The same tone executives use before delivering bad news. The same tone HR uses before layoffs. The same tone people use when pretending they're being kind. I knew that tone. And suddenly I knew exactly what was happening. No! The word escaped before I could stop it. Ethan chuckled. What? No. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face, then disappeared. He extended the envelope. Go ahead. I didn't move. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Daniel looked between us. Emily? I swallowed hard, slowly, carefully. I took the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should have. The ballroom seemed frozen. Everyone watching, everyone waiting. I opened it, and immediately wished I hadn't. The first line hit me like a punch. Notice of termination. I stared, blinking, reading it again, then again, certain I must be misunderstanding, but the words didn't change. My employment with Mercer Logistics had been terminated effective immediately. Reason? Organizational restructuring. My hands began shaking. The ballroom disappeared. The music disappeared. The voices disappeared. There was only the document, the words, the reality. 6 years, gone, just like that. At my wedding reception. Daniel took the paper from my trembling hands. His eyes scanned the page. Then his expression changed. I've seen Daniel angry before. This was different. This wasn't anger. This was fury, pure and controlled, the dangerous kind. You fired her? Ethan shrugged. We've decided to move in a different direction. You fired her at our wedding. It seemed efficient. Several guests gasped. Someone dropped a fork. The sound echoed through the silence. I looked around. Faces everywhere. Shock, disbelief, confusion. My mother had gone pale. Lily looked ready to commit violence. My aunt covered her mouth with both hands. Nobody could believe what they had just witnessed. Honestly, neither could I. The humiliation arrived first, then the anger, then something worse. Betrayal. Not because I loved Mercer Logistics, not because I believed corporations cared about people. I wasn't naive. But 6 years mattered. 6 years of missed weekends. 6 years of overtime. 6 years of solving problems nobody else wanted. And this was how they ended it? Publicly? At my wedding? Ethan raised his champagne glass, still smiling, still enjoying himself. Consider it my gift to you. The words landed like gasoline on a fire. Around us, outrage spread through the room. Guests began whispering, then openly talking, then openly staring. Daniel stepped forward. Leave. Ethan laughed. I don't think so. Leave. The smile slipped slightly. I came here to deliver company business. You came here to humiliate my wife. The word wife hit me unexpectedly, even in that moment, even surrounded by chaos. Hearing Daniel say it mattered. His wife. Not employee, not project manager, not problem solver. Wife. Someone worth protecting, someone worth defending. Ethan pointed toward the termination notice. The decision has already been made. By who? I asked. My voice sounded strange, smaller than normal, as if part of me was still processing reality. By leadership. Leadership. Interesting choice of words. Not management, not executives. Leadership. Vague enough to hide behind, specific enough to sound important. I looked directly into his eyes. Did your father approve this? Something flashed across his face, quickly, almost invisible, but I saw it. A hesitation, tiny, yet real. Then it vanished. That's irrelevant. No, it wasn't, and his reaction confirmed it. For the first time, uncertainty entered my thoughts. Because Robert Mercer, the company founder, wasn't known for this kind of behavior. Demanding? Absolutely. Strict? Definitely. But cruel? No. Never. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Unfortunately, before I could ask another question, Ethan continued, You should probably focus on married life anyway. I stared at him. What? He shrugged. Work-life balance. The room erupted. Not physically, emotionally. You could feel it. The collective realization that this wasn't business. This was personal. He wasn't terminating an employee. He was enjoying her humiliation. And everyone could see it. My uncle stood up, a retired Marine with exactly 0 patience for bullies. You need to leave. Ethan glanced toward him, amused, dismissive. Then he looked back at me. Honestly, Emily, this is probably for the best. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 6 years. 6 years. And this man was standing at my wedding reception pretending he was doing me a favor. My hands clenched into fists. Not because I wanted to hit him, because I wanted to scream, to ask why, to demand answers, to understand what I had done to deserve this. But deep down, I already knew. The spreadsheet meeting, the corrections, the challenges, the times I refused to let him take credit for other people's work. This wasn't restructuring. This was revenge. Petty, immature, cruel revenge. The realization hurt almost as much as the firing, because it meant everything I had suspected about Ethan was true, and worse. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The ballroom existed in complete silence. Then Lily stepped forward. My sister rarely lost her temper. When she did, smart people evacuated. Ethan. He looked at her. What? You have exactly 10 seconds to get out. He laughed. Big mistake. Huge mistake. Because Lily wasn't smiling, and neither were the 200 people now staring at him. The room had changed. Completely. A few minutes ago, Ethan controlled the moment. Now he was beginning to realize something. Nobody was impressed. Nobody was intimidated. Nobody thought he was powerful. They thought he was pathetic. And for the first time all evening, I noticed a crack in his confidence. Small, but there. Unfortunately for him, things were about to get much worse. Because at that exact moment, the ballroom doors opened again, and a voice echoed from the entrance. A voice Ethan knew better than anyone. What exactly is happening here? Every head in the room turned, including Ethan's. The color drained from his face instantly, because standing in the doorway was the one person he never expected to see. The one person who could destroy everything he had just done. His father, Robert Mercer. And judging by the expression on his face, he was not happy. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. The entire ballroom seemed frozen in place as every pair of eyes turned toward the entrance. Robert Mercer stood beneath the chandelier-lit doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't alone. 2 senior executives from Mercer Logistics stood behind him. Both looked serious. Neither looked happy. And suddenly, Ethan's confidence disappeared. Not gradually, not subtly. Instantly. It was like watching someone pull a plug from a wall. One second he looked smug. The next he looked terrified. I had never seen Ethan afraid before. It was almost shocking. His champagne glass lowered. His shoulders stiffened. His smile vanished. Dad? The word came out weaker than intended. Robert didn't answer. Instead, he slowly surveyed the room, the guests, the tables, the tension, the silence. Then his eyes landed on me, and finally on the termination notice still clutched in Daniel's hand. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. What happened? Robert asked. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The authority behind it filled every corner of the ballroom. Nobody answered immediately. Nobody wanted to be first. Then Lily pointed directly at Ethan. He fired her. Silence. Robert looked at Ethan. Ethan looked away. And for the first time all night, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Not because Robert was there, because of Ethan's reaction. Guilty people avoid eye contact. Confident people don't. Robert took several steps forward, slowly, deliberately. The crowd parted automatically, creating a path. His eyes never left his son. Is that true? Ethan swallowed. It was a business decision. Not an answer, a deflection. Robert noticed. Everyone noticed. I asked if it was true. Another pause, then, yes. The word barely escaped his mouth. Several guests exchanged looks. My mother squeezed my arm. Daniel moved closer. And Robert simply stared, long enough to make Ethan visibly uncomfortable. Then he spoke again. You fired an employee at her wedding reception. Ethan shifted awkwardly. When you say it like that, when I describe exactly what happened? A few guests struggled not to smile. The two executives standing behind Robert looked like they wanted to disappear. Because this wasn't just embarrassing. This was catastrophic. For the company, for the family, for everyone involved. Ethan tried again. The decision was already made. Robert extended his hand toward Daniel. The document. Daniel hesitated, then passed over the termination notice. Robert read it, slowly, carefully, line by line. The longer he read, the darker his expression became. By the time he reached the final page, the ballroom felt like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Finally, he lowered the document and looked directly at his son. Who approved this? Ethan straightened slightly, attempting to regain confidence. I did. No. Robert's voice cut through the room. Who approved this? I just told you. No, Ethan. Robert held up the document. This termination requires executive review. Silence. The kind that hurts. Because everyone understood what he was saying, including me, including Ethan, including every employee from Mercer Logistics who happened to be present. This document should never have existed, not without approval. Approval Ethan clearly didn't have. My pulse quickened, because suddenly the situation looked very different. Had he actually fired me? Or had he simply pretended to? Robert continued reading, then stopped, then read one section again, slowly, very slowly. When he looked up this time, his expression had become something else entirely. Disbelief. Organizational restructuring? Ethan nodded. Correct. Robert stared at him, then looked toward one of the executives behind him. Did we eliminate her position? The executive answered immediately. No. The room erupted into whispers. My heart skipped. What? The executive continued. In fact, her department requested additional resources last month. More whispers, more confusion, more eyes turning toward Ethan. Suddenly, his carefully crafted story was falling apart, right in front of everyone. And he knew it. The problem with lies is that they require maintenance. The larger the lie, the harder it becomes to control, especially when facts enter the conversation. Robert looked back at the termination notice, then back at Ethan, then back at the notice, like he genuinely couldn't believe what he was seeing. Did you fabricate this? Ethan's face reddened. I adjusted the language. The room gasped. Adjusted the language. What an incredible way to describe falsifying company documents. Even Lily looked impressed by the audacity. Adjusted? She repeated. The word dripped with sarcasm. Robert ignored everyone else. His attention remained fixed on his son. Tell me exactly what happened. Ethan glanced around, clearly realizing he no longer controlled the situation. Unfortunately for him, there was nowhere to hide. 200 witnesses, multiple employees, and one furious father. So he did what people like Ethan always do when cornered. He started rationalizing. I made a management decision. Why? Because she constantly undermines authority. The accusation hung in the air. My jaw tightened. Of course, there it was, the real reason. Not restructuring, not performance, not business. His ego. The executive beside Robert frowned. Undermines authority? Ethan pointed toward me. She challenges leadership in meetings. Robert looked at me. Did you? I answered honestly. When leadership made mistakes. Several guests laughed. Even some of the Mercer employees couldn't hide their reactions. Because they knew. They had been there. They had watched Ethan make bad decisions for years. The executive spoke again. Are you referring to the forecasting incident? Ethan's expression immediately changed. Bingo. Apparently, senior leadership knew about that meeting. Interesting. Very interesting. The executive continued. The incident where she prevented inaccurate projections from reaching investors? Now the whispers became louder, because this wasn't helping Ethan. At all. Robert slowly turned toward his son. That incident? Ethan looked trapped. For the first time all evening, he genuinely had nowhere to go. No excuse, no spin, no audience willing to believe him. Just consequences. And consequences were something Ethan rarely experienced. Robert folded the termination notice, carefully, precisely, then handed it back to Ethan. You're telling me you came to an employee's wedding reception. Pause. To deliver a termination notice based on personal resentment? The question landed like a hammer. Ethan didn't answer, because he couldn't, not truthfully. The silence was answer enough. Around the room, guests exchanged shocked looks. My aunt whispered something to my mother. My uncle crossed his arms. Daniel looked ready to escort Ethan out personally. And me? I felt strangely calm. The humiliation was still there, the anger was still there, but something else had replaced the panic. Perspective. Because the more Ethan spoke, the clearer everything became. This wasn't my failure, it was his. He had chosen this, planned this, created this disaster, and now he was standing inside it, alone. Robert took a slow breath, then another. The controlled breathing of a man trying very hard not to explode. Unfortunately for Ethan, it wasn't working. What possessed you? No answer. What possible outcome did you expect? Still no answer. Robert's voice grew colder. You thought this was acceptable? Ethan finally snapped. People need to respect authority. The words echoed across the ballroom and immediately sounded ridiculous. Because authority without respect isn't leadership, it's just power. And power is temporary. Everyone in that room understood that. Except Ethan. Robert stared at him. Disappointment filled his face. Not anger, not rage. Disappointment. Honestly, it looked worse. Because anger can pass. Disappointment stays. For several seconds, father and son simply looked at each other. The silence became almost unbearable. Then Robert spoke, and everything changed. Ethan. His voice was calm, too calm. The moment we leave this room, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation. Ethan paled. Everyone noticed, including me. Because suddenly it wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about my wedding or my job or the humiliation. This was about years of behavior finally catching up with someone who believed consequences were optional. And judging by Robert's expression, the bill had arrived. But the biggest surprise was still coming. Because Robert hadn't yet addressed me. Hadn't yet addressed my future. Hadn't yet revealed why he had come to the reception in the first place. And when he finally did, the entire room would learn something Ethan never knew. Something that would turn the night upside down. Because while Ethan thought he was ending my career, his father had arrived carrying something very different. A contract. One that would change my life forever. The silence that followed Robert's warning felt endless. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the waitstaff had stopped working. Every eye in the ballroom remained fixed on the Mercer family, on Ethan, on Robert, on me. A wedding reception had somehow transformed into a corporate reckoning, and nobody wanted to look away. Ethan stood frozen, still holding the termination notice, the same document he had carried into the ballroom like a trophy, the same document he had expected to humiliate me with. Now it looked very different. Now it looked like evidence. Robert finally turned away from his son. His attention shifted toward me. For a brief moment, the room disappeared. It was just the two of us. The founder of a company I had given 6 years of my life to, and an employee who had just been publicly fired at her own wedding reception. "Emily," his voice softened, "I owe you an apology." The words shocked me, not because they were dramatic, because they were sincere. Real accountability is rare, especially from powerful people. "I had no knowledge of this." He gestured toward the termination notice. "If I had known, it never would have happened." I nodded slowly. Part of me believed him. Part of me was still trying to process everything. The humiliation, the shock, the betrayal, the realization that none of this had been authorized. Daniel squeezed my hand, grounding me, reminding me I wasn't standing alone. Robert took another step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of us. "I would like to make something very clear." The room became completely silent. "Emily Carter Williams is not terminated." A wave of whispers swept through the ballroom. Guests exchanged looks. Employees looked stunned. My mother began crying again. Honestly, at this point, she might have cried if someone offered her extra breadsticks. Robert continued. "The termination notice is invalid." He looked directly at Ethan. "It was never approved." Then back at me. "As of this moment, your employment status remains unchanged." Relief hit me unexpectedly. Not because I desperately wanted the job, but because the humiliation had felt personal. Like 6 years of effort had been erased. Hearing that the firing wasn't real didn't erase the damage, but it mattered. It mattered a lot. Ethan opened his mouth. "Dad." "No." One word, sharp enough to cut steel. Ethan immediately fell silent. For the first time all evening, nobody was listening to him anymore. The spotlight had shifted, and he hated it. Robert turned toward the 2 executives standing behind him. One of them stepped forward carrying a leather portfolio. My confusion deepened. What was happening? The executive handed the portfolio to Robert. Robert accepted it, then looked back at me. "There's something else." A strange feeling settled into my stomach. Around us, guests leaned closer, listening, watching, waiting. Robert opened the portfolio, removed a document, and held it out toward me. "This is the reason I originally intended to speak with you." I frowned. "What is it?" "A contract." The room seemed to freeze again. A contract? I looked at Daniel. He looked just as confused. Slowly, I accepted the document. The pages felt heavy, professional, official. I opened the first page, then stared, then blinked, then stared again. Because surely I was reading it wrong. Surely exhaustion was affecting my vision. Surely, Director of Operations Integration? The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom, not just from family, from employees, because they understood what the title meant. It wasn't a promotion. It was a massive promotion. Executive-level responsibility, executive-level authority, executive-level salary. I looked up, certain there had been some mistake. "What?" Robert smiled slightly, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. "No mistake. I looked back down. The compensation package alone nearly made me drop the papers. The salary was more than I had ever imagined earning. The benefits were incredible. The reporting structure bypassed multiple management layers entirely. My pulse quickened. This couldn't be real. Daniel leaned over, read part of the first page, then stared at me. "Emily." His voice sounded stunned. "What?" "I think they're serious." No kidding. The ballroom had become absolutely silent, every guest waiting for an explanation. Robert provided one. "For the last 8 months, senior leadership has been evaluating candidates for a new operational leadership role." I listened carefully, still trying to understand, still trying to believe. "Several names were considered." He paused. "Yours consistently ranked first." Shock rippled through the room, including through me. First? How? Why? Robert seemed to anticipate the question. "Because every report we reviewed reached the same conclusion." He looked around the ballroom, then directly at me. "When projects fail, you fix them." A pause. "When departments stop communicating, you rebuild cooperation." Another pause. "When problems appear, people call you." The executives nodded, confirming every word. My throat tightened because suddenly I wasn't hearing criticism, or blame, or excuses. I was hearing recognition. Years of effort, years of invisible work, years of solving problems nobody else wanted. Someone had noticed. Apparently, a lot of people had noticed. I just hadn't known. Robert continued. "The role was designed specifically for someone capable of leading large-scale integration initiatives." He smiled slightly. Every evaluation suggested the same candidate. My eyes burned. Unexpectedly, painfully. Because for years I had wondered whether my work mattered, whether anyone saw it, whether any of it had made a difference. And now I had my answer. Yes, it had. The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, real applause, loud applause, emotional applause, the kind that comes from watching someone finally receive what they deserve. My mother cried harder. Lily laughed through tears. My uncle actually stood up and clapped. Several former coworkers joined him. Then everyone else followed. The ballroom thundered with applause. And for the first time since Ethan arrived, I felt something other than humiliation. Pride. Not arrogance, not revenge. Pride. The quiet kind. The kind built through years of effort, years of sacrifice, years of refusing to quit. Across the room, Ethan looked sick. Absolutely sick, because the reality had finally become clear. He hadn't interrupted a struggling employee's wedding. He had attempted to humiliate one of the company's most respected future leaders, in front of 200 witnesses, and his father. The irony was almost unbelievable. Robert waited for the applause to settle. Then he delivered the sentence that completely shattered whatever confidence Ethan still possessed. "This promotion was approved 3 weeks ago." Silence. Then gasps. I froze. 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks. That meant... Ethan's eyes widened, because he had done the math too. 3 weeks ago. Before the emails. Before the text messages. Before the termination notice. Before tonight. The promotion already existed. The contract already existed. The decision had already been made. Which meant Ethan had tried to fire someone who had already been selected for executive leadership. The look on his face was unforgettable. Pure horror. Not because he felt guilty, because he finally understood how badly he had miscalculated. For years he had underestimated me. Now everyone could see it. Robert slowly turned toward his son. "Ethan." His voice was calm. dangerously calm. You attempted to terminate an employee whose promotion had already been approved by executive leadership. The words landed like a hammer. The room went completely silent. Again. And this time nobody felt sorry for him. Nobody rushed to defend him. Nobody tried to help. Because everyone had watched him create this disaster. Now they were watching him own it. Or fail to. Robert looked exhausted, more disappointed than angry, which somehow felt worse. Then he faced me one final time. The contract remains yours if you want it. I looked down at the document, then at Daniel, then at the guests surrounding us, the people who loved me, supported me, believed in me, the people who had watched me spend years doubting my own value. Daniel smiled, a small smile, a proud smile, the kind that says, "See? I told you." My throat tightened again, not from sadness, from gratitude, because tonight had started as a nightmare, a public humiliation, a betrayal, a disaster, and somehow it had transformed into something else. A reminder. A reminder that other people's opinions don't determine your worth. A reminder that competence eventually speaks for itself. A reminder that being underestimated is often the first chapter of success. I looked at Robert, then at the contract, then back at Robert. I'll read every page carefully. A ripple of laughter moved through the ballroom. Even Robert smiled. Good answer. The tension finally broke. Conversations resumed. People breathed again. The reception slowly returned to life. Music started playing. Guests began talking. And somewhere behind me, I heard Lily say, "Best wedding reception ever." I laughed. For the first time all night, a real laugh. Because despite everything that had happened, one thing was undeniably true. Ethan Mercer had arrived believing he was ending my career. Instead, he had accidentally revealed my value to everyone in the room, including me. And as I stood there, holding the promotion contract in one hand and my husband's hand in the other, I realized something important. The story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.